Kia ora everybody. This video is to help you understand how to unpack essay questions for Level 1 film. So as you can see, this is going to cover what exactly is an essay question, what happens when you sit down in an English exam, how to choose the right question, and how to plan an answer to a question. So this video is going to cover all of those elements together for NCEA Level 1 visual text. So, in the English exam, you are going to have 3 hours to write 2 essays. Okay, that's the general standard. So you're going to write 1 essay on the poetry that we studied or the novel that you will study, and 1 on In Time. That's the general standard for the English exam. You're going to be given a set of questions for each paper. Okay, so the paper is, so there's the poetry essay paper and the film essay paper. And in each of those papers are 6 to 8 questions. Okay, the idea is that you need to choose a question which will guide your essay argument and pinpoint what you will focus on. So you choose an essay question and then you write an essay responding to that question based on In Time. So the reason that NCQA does this, the reason that they do it in the question format, is to ensure that you have a really thorough knowledge of the text and that you can recall that knowledge, and also to avoid people learning essays off by heart. So you can't just like memorize an essay and go in and write it down because it might not respond to the question. So they require you a little bit to think on your feet in the exam, and that requires you to be really familiar with the film. You're not going to know the questions beforehand. So that means you have to be prepared for a range of different questions that could come up. We can predict some things, but not all full parts of the question. So that's why we do a lot of practice to make sure that you're ready for that. So an exam question is always in the format of describe and explain. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. When it's saying describe, it's asking for a key argument from you, and explain is giving evidence. So it's like describe, present an argument, and explain, provide evidence for that argument. Essay questions always have 2 elements that you have to address, and I'm going to show you, explain to you that in a moment. And you have to answer the question in order to achieve. So you could write this amazing excellence level essay, but if it's not answering the question that you've chosen, you're not going to achieve. So the question really needs to dictate everything that you do when you sit down to write an essay. So this is an example of a level 1 essay question. Describe one important moment in the text. Explain how that moment changed at least one important relationship or character. Okay, so you've got describe the moment and explain how that moment changed a relationship or character. So describe the argument and explain the evidence for it. Okay, so in my essay, if I was going to choose this question, I would need to go into detail in both parts of that question. So let's unpack this a little bit more. The first thing that you need to do when you choose an essay question is to find the key words and look out for the pitfalls, so potential problems, okay? So let's take this question, for example. Describe at least one important place in the text. Explain how that place helped you to understand an important message. Okay, well, the first thing I should do is pull out the key elements of that question. What is that asking me for? Okay, so the question's asking me for an important place, okay, and how it helped you understand an important message, okay? So the question's asking for me an important place and an important message, okay? And the key part is to make sure that you're actually unpacking what that means, okay? So I know that important place is referring to a setting, okay? So in time, that could be Dayton or New Greenwich, right? Describe at least one important place. Explain how that place helped you to understand an important message. Well, I know that another word for message is idea or theme. Okay. So describe a setting. Explain how that setting helped you to understand an idea or a theme. Okay. So you have to unpack the question to make sure you're really understanding what it's asking you to do. The other really important thing you have to keep in mind is this part here. Describe at least one important place, okay? So I could write a whole essay just about one setting, okay? Or I could do more, okay? So at least one refers to one or more, so that's quite open, okay? But if you look here, explain how that place helped you to understand an important message, okay? That just refers to one, okay? So one or more settings, sure, but only one message. And NCEA are so picky about this that if you write an essay about multiple messages, they will take the best one, discard the rest of your essay, okay? So you have to really pay attention to the words that are in the questions. Let's have a look at another one. Describe an important conflict in the text. Explain how the conflict helped you to understand an important message. Okay, well, I'm going to start with the key terms. Important conflict, okay? An important conflict. Now, as we know from last week, this could be a social conflict or an interpersonal conflict, okay? So I could look at a social conflict or an interpersonal conflict. I get to choose. Explain how the conflict helped you to understand an important message, okay? So same thing, I know that's an idea, and I know that's a theme, okay? Either one. But this is actually quite a tricky question because it's an important conflict, so I can only write about one, and an important message. Again, I can only write about one. So one conflict to one message. And while that could be a good question, that potentially could actually be quite restrictive because you can only discuss one. So the social conflict between the rich and the poor, helping us to understand the idea of corruption, sure. 3 paragraphs on that potential. It's potentially doable, but you'd have to be really careful to make sure that you were actually addressing the one important message. Let's have a look at one more. Describe the closing scene of the text. Explain how the closing scene helped you to understand at least one important aspect of the text. Okay, so what's it asking me for? The closing scene, okay? The closing scene of the text. For us in time, that's the final confrontation scene. Final confrontation, okay? And you might have done that in some individual scene analysis and you might not have. We have looked at it in class for conflict, okay? So the last scene where the timekeeper times out, okay? So one scene. Explain how the closing scene helped you to understand at least one important aspect. Now, aspect is a really vague word, okay? So that could mean idea, it could mean character, it could mean a setting, it could mean a theme, anything, okay? So aspect is actually quite a broad word. But if we look again, describe the closing scene of the text, explain how the closing scene helped you to understand at least one important aspect, okay? At least one. So again, one or more. So this question's quite interesting because an important aspect of the text, so a theme or a character or a setting, whatever, that's quite broad. I could discuss a range of those, but I'm limited by just the one scene, okay? So hopefully you can see that it's really about choosing the right question, but you don't know what the right question is going to be until you do all of this unpacking. You have to unpack the question to make sure you really understand it, because otherwise you might end up choosing a question that's not too good, and then that's a problem because your essay won't be as strong as it could be. So let's have a look. How to unpack a question. Let's have a look at this again. Describe at least one friendship that was significant in the text. Explain how the friendship helped you to understand one or more characters or individuals. Okay? At least one friendship, so one or more. Okay? Friendship, relationship, potentially relationship. Okay? It was significant in the text. Another word for significant is important. So let's write that in. That was important in some way. Explain how the friendship helped you to understand one or more. That's good. One or more. That's helpful. Characters or individuals in the text. Okay? Characters or individuals. So, describe at least one friendship that was significant. Well, really, the only friendship that we get enough detail with is Will and Sylvia. Okay? Will and Sylvia. They end up in the romantic relationship, but in the beginning, it's a friendship. And that's really the only one that there's enough in the movie to talk about. Okay? So, one friendship, Will and Sylvia. That's what I'm going to talk about. Explain how the friendship helped you to understand one or more characters or individuals. Okay, well, their friendship shows us a lot about Will, okay, tells us about Will as a person. It also tells us about Sylvia as a person and how she changes in the text, because Will really changes her. She goes through a change. She's originally like quite spoiled, and then towards the end of the film, she understands her place in the world and how the corrupt nature of her father and his time is kind of hurting people and keeping the cycle of poverty going. Okay, so you could even make the argument that Will and Sylvia's friendship helps us understand Philippe, because he really despises how Will has sort of taken Sylvia and shown her the truth, and it shows how he doesn't want anybody corrupting his control of the world. Okay, so this particular question, I would talk about Will and Sylvia's friendship and how it taught me things about Will, about Sylvia, and about Philippe. Okay, so that's quite a good question, but you've got to make sure that you're unpacking all of the elements. Let's try another one. Describe either a realistic or unrealistic setting, which I know is a place, in the text. Explain how the realism or unreality of the setting helped you to understand a particular idea. Okay, so I know idea is theme or message. Okay, so this is a tricky question because there's a lot of ors, like ands, ors in here. Describe either a realistic or unrealistic setting. So that means it's either realistic or unrealistic, not both. Okay, so I have to choose one. If I write about both, I'm not answering the question properly. Okay, explain how the realism or unreality, so that's connected, helped you to understand a particular idea. Again, that's one. You can only discuss one idea or theme or message. Okay, so for this particular question, you have to understand and figure out whether the settings are realistic or unrealistic. Okay. The other thing, again, setting. That's one. Okay. So one setting to one idea. So you have to decide, is this a question that you could answer? Well, for me, I might describe say maybe Dayton. I think I'll talk about Dayton, District 12, okay? And I might say it's realistic, okay? Because it helped me to understand the message of poverty, because that's the way our society works now is very similar, right? People live day to day. They're stuck in a cycle of poverty. They can only get so much to live for the next day. That's very realistic, even though the film is set in the future. So unpacking the question is the most important part of essay writing, because you have to make sure that you understand what you're going to write about. So, some things that always trip people up when choosing essay questions. Not answering the question, okay? It trips up people so often. They get a character question and they choose that to write on, and then they don't even really mention character, okay? That's a real problem. It happens all the time. If you choose a question, you have to make sure that you're unpacking it properly and answering it directly. Discussing more than one element, okay? So if the question specifically asks for an important conflict, you can only talk about one. If you talk about more than one, they discard the weaker parts of your essay and don't mark it. Choosing a bad question, okay? Not all of the questions in the booklet when you sit down in the exam are going to be good choices for in time. So for example, describe at least one symbol used. Explain how the symbol helped you understand a key character. Well, we haven't looked at symbolism in time in the film, so we haven't actually studied this in class. It would be a bad choice because there's not a whole lot of symbolism in the film, okay? So that wouldn't be helpful for you to do. People who try to jam a pre-learned essay into a question that doesn't fit, people try it all the time. They pre-learn an essay and then just try and make it fit. So they memorize it and then they try and make it fit to a question, and it never works because you have to answer the question directly. People not being prepared for a range of question types. So people think, okay, I'm just going to talk about theme and character, and then they get in to the exam and there's not a question for theme and character, and then they're lost. So you have to be prepared to talk about a range of different elements like character, setting, theme, all those things. And not taking time to unpack a question. Okay, people that just choose a question and start writing the essay, it never goes well because they often miss key elements or they misinterpret it, and they end up either not passing or just scraping through because they're not addressing the question properly. So these are the most common things that come up in essay writing. Okay, so in class, what we would do here is that I'm going to give each group in the class a question to unpack. So if you're at home, it would be a good idea to do this anyway. I've got the questions on the next slide. It would be a good idea to pause the video when you see the questions, choose one, write it down, and practice unpacking that I've just been modeling. So what do the questions mean? Pull out any pitfalls like singles or more than one, anything like that, and plan how would you write an essay on that question. So remember, an essay has 3 paragraphs. How would you make 3 separate points to an argument with that question? So these are the questions here for you. So I recommend you pause the video, choose a question, and practice unpacking the question. So key words, pitfalls, how you would write an essay based on this question. So practice makes perfect.